Hello, my name is Medhat Elmasry. Today, this video is about an introduction to ASP.NET MVC using dotnet Core 3.0.100. So let's look at the version of dotnet Core that I've got on this machine. You do that by typing dotnet -- version. And so the version that I've got is a preview version just before the release of dotnet 3.0, which is expected to happen pretty soon. I'm going to develop an ASP.NET MVC app, and I'll discuss with you the architecture of what constitutes an ASP.NET MVC application. To start, we will go into a folder where we can create our application. I will create a folder here which I will call ASP Core MVC, and then I'll go into that folder. In order to create an ASP.NET MVC app, I will use one of the standard templates that comes with dotnet Core. So let's have a look at what templates there are. I do that by typing in dotnet new -- help. And this gives you a list of the various templates that we've got. The one that I want to use is this one, MVC. So if I type ASP.NET new MVC, it will create for me an MVC template. So dotnet new MVC. Now this quickly creates for me an ASP.NET application. And you can see there's a bunch of files here. If I want to run this, I can do the following. .NET restore will restore any packages that are needed by this application. And then .NET build will build the code for me. .NET run will run the application. There is no need to do the .NET restore and the .NET build because .NET run does a restore and build. But it's good to know what those commands do. At this point, by hitting .NET run, and my application at this point should be listening on the appropriate port number so that you can view this website. And the port numbers are given here. This one and this one. So this application listens on 5001 using HTTPS and 5000 with no HTTPS. Let's have a look and see what's happening. So I'm going to go into a browser and go over here, local host 5000. This is one of the port numbers, and you will see that even though I entered port 5000, it redirected to 5001. So there's some code in this application that sort of forces you to use HTTPS. Let's open this application in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to come here and open with code using this option. And there we go. This is what we've got here. A few things that are worth noting here. This application uses the Model View Controller architecture. Now, while I was talking to you, this thing popped up here. And this thing popped up saying that there are some required assets to build this application. Just click on yes and let it do its thing. Going back to the architecture of this application, this is based on the Model View Controller architecture. So you will see here that there is a models folder, there is a view folder and a controllers folder. Let's discuss what this model view controller architecture is. I'll illustrate it by drawing a few diagrams here. If we say this is the controller in this architecture is the recipient of the request. So you could say the request comes to the controller. Now the controller has under its disposal the models and it's got the views. The controller looks at the request and determines what sort of models it needs. And it chooses the model and passes that model to the view. So this is the important job of the controller. It chooses the model and passes it to the view. And it is the view that sends out the response to the user. Now, this kind of architecture is very different from other web architectures where the view is the recipient of the request and it actually sends out the response. In this architecture, controller gets the request, views, sends back the response. So let's go back to our web application. Typically, what we see under models is simply the data. The data is considered to be the model. What we see under views are the pages, the HTML pages. They go under views. And the way I think of controllers is that the controllers are the glue between the model and the view. They glue everything together. Now, if we run our application, this is what we see. Now, this application pretty much has two pages. It has home and it has privacy. If I click on home, it comes to the home page. And if I click on privacy, it goes to the privacy page. Now, let's look at the URL of home. You will see that the URL is just localhost and you don't have / anything here. This is obviously going to a landing page that is the default page. Whereas when you click on privacy, it goes to home followed by privacy. Now the thing to know about the way the URL is constructed in the MVC architecture is that this first part of the URL, it always represents the controller. This second part represents what we call the action method. To understand this, let us go and have a look at our controller. If you expand the controllers folder, you will see only one file called home controller. Every time you create a controller, for example, if I create a controller called the process controller, the name of the file is always the name of the controller followed by controller itself. So let's open this up and have a look. Now there are three methods here. These three methods are what we call action methods. This is one action method. This is another action method. And this is the third action method. If I want to hit this action method, the index action method, which happens to be the default action method, I hit it by typing in the URL line the name of the controller followed by the action method. So let's go back here, and if I enter home /index, this will always take me to that index action method. And as I said before, this is the controller and this is the action method. So let's come here and hit enter. and it goes to the same page. Now this goes to the same page as if I did not enter the controller and the action method. It's the same page. The reason that happens is because the default page that has been specified in this application happens to be home index. Where is that specified? If you go into the startup.cs file, you go to the bottom here. This is the way the routing has been defined. These are the routing rules. And it says here, the default routing rule is this. The first part of the address is the controller, and the default name of the controller is home. That's why we don't need to specify home. And then the second part of the address is the action method. And the default for the action method is index. There is an optional third part. And the third part of the address allows you to pass parameters. Pretty much things like product keys, ID, numbers, that sort of thing. So this is where our mapping is defined. Now, to prove my point here, let us add a new action method here. And I'm going to call this action method hello. Now, whenever I change something, I need to restart the web server because this hello will not be found. Let's try. If I want to hit hello, I have to enter the name of the controller followed by the word hello. And notice, ASP.NET MVC is not case sensitive. It doesn't matter, the case doesn't matter. So let me try this. If I do this, it's going to crap. 404, which means page not found. That is because I need to restart the server. Let me restart the server, and I assure you that it will find something. Let's go back here, and if I hit enter, it found something. Now, it is complaining about the fact that it cannot find the view. It found the controller, it found the action method, but there is no view associated with the action method. This is another rule. Every action method in ASP.NET MVC must have its corresponding view. So where are the views kept? The views are kept under views. Now, the rule is that under views, you always have a folder by the name of the controller. So there's a folder by the name of home, which is the name of the controller. And if you expand this, you will see that there are two views. There is index and there is privacy. But I created something called hello. So there must be a hello here. And in fact, I know that because it is searching for hello.cshtml under home, under shared, and under pages shared. So let us satisfy its need for this hello.cshtml under home. Let's quickly come here and maybe copy this privacy page, copy it, come here and paste it, and let's rename this to hello. And let's customize this so that we can prove that it is indeed the hello page. So I'm going to say hello page. Now, this kind of syntax, it's probably the first time that you come across this. This kind of syntax is called razor syntax. It allows you to use some C# inside of the view. You can stick in any kind of C# between the opening at open brace and the closed brace. For example, I want to define an array of strings. I would do something like this. String array, and let's say months equals to say January, February, March, April. I'm not going to do all the months, not to waste time. And let's say I want to iterate through all of these. Now there's another Razor syntax that allows me to iterate through a collection. Put a semicolon here. So I can do at for each, and I can iterate through this. Var item in months. If I want to display the data inside of an unordered list, I can do something like this. And the thing about Razor is you can have Razor inside of HTML markup, or you can have HTML markup inside of Razor. You can mix and match. So this is a scenario where your Razor is inside of HTML, and here's another scenario where your HTML is inside the Razor code. So let us refresh and see whether we can see this page. And it can't find it. We need to restart the server. Now, to get around this problem of having to restart the server every so often, there's a way for developers to get dotnet to watch for any changes in the file system, and if it finds a change in the file system, it restarts the server itself. And the way to do that is this: dotnet watch run. If you put the word watch in there, anytime the file system changes, it's going to restart the server. So let's try this. So I come here, home, hello. You see, this worked. So it found the page that I added, and you can see it has iterated through the months. So what did we learn so far? We learned that if you want to add a new page to the same controller, you just add an action method, but make sure that that action method has a corresponding view, otherwise it won't work. Now, suppose I want this hello page to have an entry in the menu system. In other words, I want to stick a menu item here for hello. Where do I do that? Under views, there is a folder called shared. And typically, the pages or the views that go under here are those views that are shared. Now there is this special file called layout.cshtml. This layout.cshtml is you could say it's the master page, you can call it a template, you can call it the envelope. It is the HTML page that contains all the top level HTML elements of our website. In other words, it contains the HTML tag, the head tag, the body tag, and all other views get injected in this. So let's have a look. Let's open this. You can see here that you have all the top level HTML elements, and then you have some of these tags that are not really HTML. These are all ASP.NET tags that get translated into HTML when it gets served to the user. If we want to add a new menu item for hello, we would go into this navigation area and copy and paste one of these, a new line item. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and you can see that there are some tags that are very proprietary to ASP.NET. There is this attribute called ASP controller, and it points to the home controller. And then there's another one for the action method, ASP action. So in our case, if we want to point to hello, the controller is home, but the action method is hello. So I'm going to change this to hello. And this text that appears on the menu, it's simply hello. Okay? So this should create for us that menu item? Let's find out. I'm going to come here and refresh. And sure enough, I got this menu item. So if I go to the root and I click on hello, it takes me to the page because I built it into my menu system. This here represents the injection point for the views. All views, they get injected right in this place. Some other things that are of interest here is, for example, this section here, render section. This section is where you inject JavaScript, depending on which view you want to inject it into. You could have actually done something like this. For example, this is importing a JavaScript called site.js. But this one is different from this. This line here injects it for all pages, for all action methods. Whereas this one allows you to optionally inject JavaScript depending upon what you're trying to do. There could be some JavaScript that you don't want to be available on all pages. That would be a waste. So you could optionally inject it in whichever pages you want to put it into. Now, let's say I create another page. I'm going to copy this and paste it here and call this bingo, for example. So I created yet another action method, but I didn't do the views. Now if I go to my page here and type in home bingo, it will crap out like before. It's trying to find the views. ASP.NET comes with a utility called the aspnet-codegenerator. If you want to use that utility, you have to install it on your computer globally. Enter .NET tool install globally, -G stands for globally, .NET ASP.NET code generator. If you do this command, it will install for you that utility. Now, I can do that on my machine, but I already have that. And if I enter, it says this is already installed. If you don't have it, it will install it for you. This tool allows you to scaffold things like views, controllers. Now, if you want to use this code generator, there is a package that you need to add to your application. You do that by typing the following: .NET add package Microsoft Visual Studio web code generation design. So it's a two-step process. You must have the code generator utility, and you have to have this package installed in your application. Otherwise, it won't work. So let's take this. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to stop my web app, and I'm going to add this package to it. If I go to my web application, there is a file called the name of your app followed by csproj. This is the project file. And if you open the project file, it has an entry here by the name of the package that we just installed. Every time you add a package, it's going to be added to this csproj file. And also here, another item that's also stored in this file is the version of .NET Core that you're using. In my case, I'm using .NET Core 3.0. Now, if I want to add this view, which is the bingo view, instead of typing it in to Visual Studio Code, I can have this utility created for me. And we call that scaffolding. The command for scaffolding is this: .NET followed by aspnet-codegenerator, and you're going to say view. And what did I call the page? I said I'll call it bingo, right? So I created an action method called bingo. Now I need a view called bingo. So I can say create for me a view called bingo, and I want it to be empty. And then there's a switch here, use default layout. Use default layout means it's going to use the layout that I talked to you about, the file called _layouts. And the final switch we can use is outdir, and that specifies the output directory. And my output directory has to go to views/home. So I want this file to be created in views/home. So I can copy this and go into my command line and run this. The ASP.NET code generator is typically used by developers who are working in the command line on the Mac or on Linux, and even you can do that on Windows, of course, because I'm using Windows here. But if you're using Visual Studio 2019 or later or even before, you don't need to use these code generators, because you can right-click on an app and say add for me a controller, add for me a view. We will look at that later on. We will see that if you're using Visual Studio 2019, a lot of these things are already built into the IDE. This is what happened. I executed this command to generate for me a view called bingo. Let's see if it actually created that. So if I go under views and I go under home, you will see here that it indeed created for me a page called bingo. Let's open that up. Now you might ask, what is this object? I'll explain that to you in a minute. But we can take this, put it here, and now if I refresh my page, it should say bingo. No, that's because I stopped the web server. Let me restart the web server. If I come here and try to get to that page, yes, it finds it. A question that I posed was, what the hell is this? Let's go back to the controller. This is my bingo action method. I said earlier on when I talked about the architecture and the duties of the controller, I said that the job of the controller is to select the model and pass it to the view. This syntax here is a way by which the controller can pass data to the view. So if I take this and say, put it here, view data, and I can call it whatever I want. I can call this nice, or whatever you want to call it. Nice equals to, this is coming from the bingo action method. Now, if I throw this value into a dictionary, this is nothing but a dictionary. If I throw this value into a dictionary with the key nice, I can retrieve it in the view. So let me take this and come in the view, bingo view, and display it, for example, under a header 5. And I can say this, display for me view data with key nice. Whenever I do that, I have to put at before view data, which means pretty much printed. If I save this and refresh, here it is. This came from the controller. So we see the architecture in action here. The controller chose a model and it passed it to the view. Let's go back to the action method and the controller. This is one way of creating this dictionary key. Another way which is a very similar syntax, is to use a view bag. And a view bag is just pretty much like a view data object. So let me comment this out. Actually, let me copy it first, paste it here, and comment out this. Now, instead of view data, I'm going to use something called a view bag. A view bag is like a dynamic object, and I can give it a key, whatever I want to call it, nice. So if I say view bag nice, I'm pretty much doing the same thing as I did in the previous line. I'm adding it to a dictionary. If I come back here and I refresh, I'll get the same result, no change. Just to prove to you, let me add something here in the home controller. Okay, save this, come back here, it worked again. So this is definitely coming from the view bag. Now notice that I'm adding this to a view bag nice here, and I'm retrieving it from view data nice. So they're interchangeable. I mean, I can also retrieve it here from view bag nice. Comes to the same. Just to prove to you, come back here and maybe make this uppercase. And then go to my page. Sometimes it crashes here. It's because this watcher is restarting the web server. So I'm requesting the page while the web server is in the process of being restarted. So that's why it sort of craps out. This is the latest version of my web page. So what have we done so far? We were able to create an action method and add a view. We were able to change the menu system. So one thing we haven't done is create a controller. So let's add a new controller. And the controller I'm going to add, since we don't want to get into the complication of working with databases, I want to retrieve data from somewhere. So I'm going to retrieve some data from my operating system. And as an example, in Windows, if you go to PowerShell, if I enter the command get process, this is a PowerShell command. It will give me all the processes that are running in my operating system. I'm going to use this as a data source. You might ask, okay, does this work on the Mac? Does it work on Linux? And the answer is yes. Maybe this particular command does not work, but what I'm trying to do and what I will be doing in reading these processes from the operating system, they work on the Mac too. The first thing we need to do is we need to scaffold a controller. So I'm going to stop the web server and write a command for scaffolding a controller. Scaffold for me a controller, and the name of the controller is process controller. And the output directory, obviously it has to go into the controllers folder because that's where it belongs. So let's take this and run it over here. So if I go back into my Visual Studio Code, go under controllers, sure enough, I have a controller here called process controller. Now, did it add for me a view? No, we don't have any views. So let's go back to our process controller and have a peek at what it's done. It created for me one action method, which is the index action method, and we know that this is the default action method. If I request this, it will not work because it needs to have a view for index. Let's create a view for index. We want to create a view called index, it's supposed to be empty, and the output directory should be views process. Now we don't have a process folder, but it will create one. Copy this, go back here and paste it. Let's have a look. If you go under views, now we have a process folder, and under the process folder there is the view called index.cshtml. At this point we can start our web server. Now in order to get to that page, I have to create a new URL, and the controller would be process, and the action method would be index. I don't really need to enter the action method because it's the default. So all I need to do here to get to that page is process, and that should take me right there. This is my new page. So here's my process controller, and this is my process view. Let's change this. Let me change the title to processes. And I can take this view data object and make it a title and put an at before it. So this should work. Okay, so it says processes. Now that I have my action method, my controller, my views, let me make this controller do something useful for me. And I mentioned that I want to read the processes that are happening in the operating system. I'm going to come to my controller and import a namespace called system.diagnostics. This namespace allows me to read all the processes that are happening in the operating system. Now over here there is an object called process, and it's got a method called getProcesses. And if you look at the signature of this getProcesses method, it returns an array of process objects. So I'm going to use this. getProcesses, and this returns an array of process object, and let me just call that P. So now this object is going to have all the processes that are running in my operating system. If I want to send that to the view, I can pass it inside of a view bag. If you remember what a view bag is. So I can say view bag dot my processes equals to P. Now if I want to consume this, or if I want to show it in my view, I can come here, copy this so I don't make a typo. I can come here and say I want to read all the processes, but when you use a dictionary, those objects, they need to be casted back into what they are. So the way to do that is I can say as system.diagnostics.process array. So I'm going to cast it, and I'll add it to a var equals to. So now I have this object here. I can do something with it. I can iterate through it like we did earlier on with our string array. So let me create an unordered list here and then iterate through it like before. Okay? So this should display for me all these processes running in our operating system. Let's find out if this is going to work. Come here and refresh. Here we go. Now, there is one problem. These are just giving me objects, so I have to display a property in that object. Let me go back here and request that we see, for example, the process name. Refresh, and now I should be able to see all my process names as you can see here. This is coming from the operating system. There is another way of passing data from your controller to the view, and this is called the concrete class way of doing it. If we go back to our controller here, I'm going to create another action method here. Let me call that welcome. Instead of putting the object inside of a view bag, what I can do is I can take this object and pass it as an argument inside of the view. This ships the object and sends it to the view. But on the side of the view, I need to tell it what that model is constituted from. Because I created a new welcome action method, I need to create a welcome view. So let's go back to our generator here, and maybe we can recall the previous one. And here I want to create a page or a view called welcome, just like we did for index. Hit enter, and I should get a new view now. So here it is. We have a welcome view. The way you deal with these concrete classes is that on the side of the view, you have to describe what the model looks like. And the way to do that is you're going to say to the view, expect a model that looks like this. enumerable of type system.diagnostics.process. This is the type of object that's coming through. Now, to save time, I'm going to copy this here from the index page, and I'll put it here. But you're not going to iterate through my process objects. You're going to iterate through model. So the word model with a big M represents this thing that's coming through. So copy this and put it as a title so we can see welcome. Let's refresh and see what's going to happen. This URL takes me to the old process page. I didn't start the server. So let me start the server. So going back here, if I go to this page, it will take me to process./index, which is my previous one. But if I want to go to welcome, I have to type in the word welcome here, so it hits that action method. Let's see what's going to happen. It's the same thing. But index is using a view bag, welcome is using a concrete class to pass the data from the controller to the view. Now, one of the most common questions is, suppose I want to use a concrete class, but I want to pass more than one object. If you have that kind of scenario, then you can always create a superclass that contains more than one property, and you can add more complex objects into a superclass. The next step is, I want to be able to click on any one of these and see the details. The way to do that is to turn this into an anchor, an A tag. So let's say A. For the moment, I'm just going to do this. So we have an anchor tab. So if we create an anchor here, there are some attributes that would specify the controller, the action method, and the ID. And these would be those properties. You'd enter here ASP controller, and the value for that would be process, because process is our controller. The action method is welcome, and this is important here. This ASP route ID would enable the third component of the address in the URL line to be the ID of the process. So let's save this and refresh. And you will see now this is doing exactly what we wanted it to do. When I hover over one of these, I get this link. This is the controller, this is the action method, and this is the ID. Now there is one thing that I did which is incorrect, because when I click on this, I need to go to an action page that is not welcome. It has to be something else. So I'm going to go back here, and instead of welcome, I'm going to specify this as being display. But of course, I don't have a display action method yet, so I have to add one. So let's go to our controller and copy one of these and paste it here, and the action method will be display. Now this display, it's going to take as an argument the ID, and that's of type int. That's how you pass the argument. And it's going to return a process object using a method here that belongs to the process class called getProcessById. There's already a method that does that. And I'm going to pass it an ID. We don't need this anymore. So once I get the process, I'm going to pass that as a concrete class to the view. So I created an action method called display, and I'm missing a view. So I have to go down to my scaffolder or code generator to create for myself a view. So I have to stop the server, go and look for a view that I created before. And the last one I did is welcome. I'm going to change this name to display. And it goes into the same views folder. Let's hit enter here and see what happens. And before I forget, let me start the web server. So now, if I go under views process, I see that there is a view called display. Let me open up that view and repurpose it for what I wanted to do. We have to pass a model here because we're using the concrete class model. So I'm going to type in model system.diagnostics.process because the actual object is system.diagnostics.process. If I want to display the model, I can do something like this. I can put it in a paragraph and say, for example, name is, and I can say at model dot process name. I'm going to just display a subset of all these properties. I want also to have the ID, the name, and maybe there's another property, let's see, handle count. So this should display the details. Let's see if this is going to work. I'm going to refresh this page. So let's click on one of these, and here we go. We're getting the details. What else is there that we can find out in the template that we're using here? This folder, the www root folder, contains all the static artifacts that are needed by our web application. For example, if we need like JavaScript files, CSS files, images, and so on, they all go under the www root directory. Let's go back into views. When you look at views shared, there are certain files that start with the underscore. And the underscore typically means that this file is shared. One of the common shared files are what we call partial views. And I'll give you an example. I can create a partial view right here. So I'll create a new file and I'll call it underscore dummy partial view .cshtml. And I'll put something very, very rudimentary in here. For example, let's say I have a div tag, and inside of this div tag I have an h1 tag, and let's say I'll just say this is coming from the dummy partial view. And let's put in some styles here. Although it's bad practice to put styles in line, this is just for demo purposes. I'm going to say style equals to, the idea of a partial view is to create some sort of HTML that you can inject in any other view, so it can be shared. Let's come to display here, and if I want to inject that partial view, there's a tag called partial, and there's a property called name equals to be underscore dummy partial view. Now let me go back to my website, go home, and then go back to process/welcome. And I click on one of these, there it is. The partial view has been injected inside of the detail. I can inject it anywhere I want. So it's a shared kind of view. Another thing that's also worth noting is under views, there is this file called view imports. This view imports allows you to universally import a namespace so that it becomes available to any view. Let's do some modification to the application that we just created. If we go into, say, process display, we are importing this namespace called system diagnostics. And then also in welcome, we are importing system diagnostics. So why don't we just globally take this namespace and put it into that file, into the view imports file. So I'm going to take it out of here, and then also take it out of here and put it in view import. Here I'm going to say using system diagnostics. So in display, my model is going to be process, and in welcome it's just going to be IEnumerable of process. So if I restart, just to prove to you that this is going to work, okay? Restart everything so that we know that this is going to import those namespaces. So now if I go to my app, home, and then I go to process, welcome, it's still going to work, just like before. We built this application using Visual Studio Code, and we did it as a programmer who likes to use the command line and who likes to scaffold everything by themselves. It's worth having a look at what Visual Studio 2019 can do for us and how it could simplify the process. Let me shut down this web server by hitting Control-C here. And let's start using Visual Studio 2019. I'm going to close Visual Studio Code. And if you do a dir, one of the files obviously is your csproj file. If I request the csproj file from the command line just like this, this extension is associated in the operating system with Visual Studio 2019. At least in Windows it is. So if I hit enter here, it will open up for me this project in Visual Studio 2019. I can run this, and there are two ways of running this. If you look at this drop-down list here, there are two web servers that you can use. There is IIS Express that comes with Visual Studio 2019, and then there is this other web server. This other web server is the web server that we were using up to now. This web server is called Kestrel, and it comes with .NET Core. So have a look. Now if I click on this button here, it's going to open for me the application in IIS Express. And how do I know it's IIS Express? Because this thing pops up at the bottom of my Windows. And this represents IIS Express. And another indication that we're using IIS Express is the port number is not the standard 5000 and 5001 that's used by Kestrel. It is some other port number. But the application behaves the same. So I can come here and say /process/welcome. So it still works. This all works. The other web server is the Kestrel web server. So I can come here and click on the name of my project, and that will start the Kestrel web server. If I click on this, on the button now, it will start the Kestrel web server. And the Kestrel web server opens up a command terminal window, and you can see that the messages here are identical to what we've been seeing all along. And this is running under port 5001. So we're using Kestrel here, and it behaves just the same. Let us stop this and work with IIS Express. Let me add a controller, just to show you how easy it is to add a controller. In Visual Studio 2019, you can right-click on this and say Add Controller. And it will add for your controller. Let me do that. Add controller, and then you get a list of different types of controllers that you can add. We're going to add an empty controller. It will ask you for a name. I'm going to call it the super controller. So remember, always your controller name has to be tagged to the word controller. Click on Add. Now, something that's different about Visual Studio 2019 is it always expects that you have a solution file. Remember that in Visual Studio Code, we don't have a solution file. What is a solution file? In Visual Studio 2019, there's this concept of a solution that is a collection of projects. You can have one solution and multiple projects underneath it. So far, in our Visual Studio Code experience, we didn't have that scenario. In any case, here it's trying to save a solution file in the same folder as our project, and we're just going to say, okay, go ahead and do that. You get a warning here that ASP.NET Core MVC has been modified. So the project file has been modified. So you can just click on Reload, and there we go. we got a controller that only has the index view. Now, the next question is, did it create for us a view for this thing? And the answer is, it hasn't really created a view, because I created a controller called super. So if it had created a view, it would have created a folder here called super. It didn't do that. One of the benefits of Visual Studio 2019 is you can right click and say add view. And it knows to go and add that view in the right place. Right click here and say add view. And it asks you what's the name of the view. I'm just going to say index, add, and now it's adding the view for us. You can see now we have a folder called super. And underneath that folder, we have our view called index.cshtml. I hope you found this video useful, and I hope to see you another time. Goodbye.